There was a time above, a time before. There were perfect things, diamond absolutes. Things fall, things on earth, and what falls is fallen.
At their very core, each and every film ever made can be categorized between two opposite types, smart or dumb. A movie is either a smart movie or a dumb movie, or somewhere in between. And to be clear, that's not the same as being good or bad. Both smart and dumb movies can be good or bad. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is good in a small, complex, smart way. Fast and Furious is good in a big, loud, dumb way. But essentially, all movies at the end of the day are always one or the other, a smart movie or a dumb movie. At least almost always. Batman v Superman for the longest of times has been a bit of a mystery to me. As in, it's not a particularly bad movie. It doesn't give me depression like some later DCEU entries do. But still, it's not too good either. And to be honest, it did fail to reach the level of awesomeness that a film with the title Batman v Superman should reach. And this can only make you wonder, why is that? What exactly is the issue with this movie? If it's not so clearly bad, why wasn't it too good either? As usual, there has been quite a bit of online discussion about what the problem with Batman v Superman is. Some people say there's not enough Batman and Superman, others say they just didn't like Mark Zuckerberg as the villain. And those are all good points. But if you've seen any content on this channel before, you know that in here we like to dig a bit deeper. Even though surface level problems might be valid, most often all flawed movies have one big key issue at their very core, something Batman v Superman does have. And this particular issue revolves around the smart or dumb concept I just mentioned. Maybe the issue of BVS is that it's too smart and complex. Well, that can't be it because The Dark Knight is very smart and complex and good. Maybe the issue of BVS then is that it's too loud and dumb. Well, the newest Thor movie is pretty loud and dumb and still good, so that can't be it either. No, the core issue of Batman v Superman isn't that it's too smart or too dumb. The core issue of Batman v Superman is that it's both. It's a very smart movie and a very dumb movie, both at the same time, which to me is a big no-no. And this is the reason behind today's Anatomy of a Failure. In honor of Ocean Man hitting theaters, let's travel back to a time when the best way to describe the DCEU wasn't with a hot pile of trash. Let's take a deep dive into the smart side and the dumb side of Batman v Superman and try to figure out how the gap between them became this movie's biggest flaw. How this steep opposition cursed it with failure. And at the end, maybe we'll also find out the reason for this opposition. Before we can view the full picture of Batman v Superman's core problem, we're gonna have to first go through some of the bigger story elements seen in its smart side. Because depending on the version you're watching, the smart, complex side of this movie roughly makes up the first 50 to 60% of the total runtime. In other words, pretty much all the setups and a big part of the build-up are done in a very smart, complex way. For example, just look at the Lois Lane plotline starting at the beginning. We're in the grainy Middle East. We have infamous warlords, we have shadowy operatives with shadowy agendas, we have US Predator drones. What we have is very much like something along the lines of Bourne or Zero Dark 30 or in some ways even Argo. And if that's not enough, this plotline then goes even more Bourne, with Lois Lane using her investigative reporter skills to follow a trail of secret government project breadcrumbs that ultimately leads her to Lex Luthor. Is all of this good or bad? That's up to you. But regardless of any personal opinions, it is smart. It's complex and it's very real-life based. Much more so than was the case in Man of Steel with that whole spaceship excavation section. Another great example is the conflict built up between Batman and Superman. Since this movie is titled Batman v Superman, at some point those two are gonna have to fight. And if they're gonna fight, they're gonna need a reason to fight. And this reason is something the movie sets up very well, in a very smart and very layered way. Batman is built to despise Superman because Superman to him represents uncontrollability. And if there is one type of person Batman doesn't enjoy, it's someone who is uncontrollable. Superman, on the other hand, is built to dislike Batman, because Batman to him represents violence and destruction. And if there's a type of person Superman doesn't enjoy, it's someone who is so invested in their personal cause that they become a physical manifestation of violence and destruction. And so, because the philosophical beliefs of Batman and Superman are so much in conflict, so are they. Same with Lex Luthor. I know a lot of fans didn't really enjoy this new entitled Silicon Valley version of the character, the most common complaint being that he's a ripoff of the Joker, that there's no real reason for his actions. And while I do understand why not everyone likes this version of Lex, personally I don't really agree with the fact that there's no reason for his actions, because there is a reason, a very well made, very layered and mature reason. You just have to go a bit deeper to find it. Everything Lex Luthor does in BVS is simply because he hates Superman. Because to him, Superman represents the feeling of powerlessness. In other words, Superman reminds Lex of the only other person in the world who has ever made him feel powerless, his own abusive father. Now that this all-powerful god has taken the spotlight, that feeling of powerlessness in Lex is back. And the only way to get rid of that feeling is by getting rid of God. This would make sense too, since Zack Snyder has alluded to the fact that Lex killed his own father. Because in Lex's eyes, power and evil are tied together. With great power comes great evil. That's why no all-powerful god ever rescued Lex from being beaten as a child. That's why Superman is an evil fraud who shouldn't be celebrated as a hero.
No man in the sky intervened when I was a boy to deliver me from Daddy's fist and abominations. I figured out way back. If God is all-powerful, he cannot be all good. And neither can you be. I don't hate the sinner. I hate the sin.
10 seconds to end.
And yours, my friend, is existing.
Bruce Wayne's corporate espionage at LexCorp, all the senator and courtroom stuff, the list goes on and on. Pretty much everything this movie sets up, it does in a very real and intricate and smart way. But even though this might be a positive thing in most films, in BVS it isn't. Because in order to work, a smart setup always needs a smart payoff. And as we will soon see, the payoffs in Batman v Superman aren't that smart. In fact, they are the exact opposite. As we get to the last 50 to 40% of Batman v Superman, that's when this complex, smartly built up story starts becoming something entirely else. It becomes your usual full-on, big, loud, dumb Hollywood blockbuster. Now we get to the stuff where Superman launches Batman through an apartment building. Now we get to the stuff where the US launches a nuclear warhead in 20 seconds. Now we get to the part where every smart setup is concluded with a dumb payoff. And to be clear, not dumb as in bad, but dumb as in very drastically different from smart. First up is Lois Lane. Whereas before she was this very capable and intelligent investigator, at the end she becomes a total idiot. Almost to the point where you'd think that you're watching a slapstick comedy. That kryptonite spear, for whatever reason she decides to toss it down a water-filled shaft where anyone can find it. And not only that, she then dives after it, only to get stuck and then needs to be rescued. Much like a little dumb teenager who gets caught in a baby swing and has to be pulled out by the fire department. If Lois Lane was always like this in the movie, fine. But the thing is, she's not. Earlier she's smart, she's competent. Maybe not as competent as in Man of Steel, but competent nonetheless. And now that she's suddenly making dumb decisions in order for the big dumb part of the story to work, it really pulls you out of the experience. Same with the conflict between Batman and Superman. While Batman's motivations to fight Superman do remain as they were, Superman's motivations get redone entirely. As in, the movie just tosses his motivations aside and makes him fight Batman because Lex Luthor forces him to. It works, but it's not very complex or smart. And if you're going to have Superman fight Batman only because he has to, what's the point of setting up his personal side of the conflict at all? What's the point of spending all this time on a smart setup if you're just going to conclude it with a dumb payoff? Even with Lex Luthor, after his demonic beast kills off Superman, what kind of multi-layered payoff do we get from him? Do we see him staring at Superman's corpse and then breaking down in tears of joy because he was finally able to destroy the person he so deeply hates, like he once did with his father? Of course not, because that's something a smart movie would do. Instead here, he gives off as much emotion as a wooden plank and then becomes a Joker-like lunatic just so that he can foreshadow the next movie. Bruce Wayne's corporate espionage plotline, how does that get paid off? Well, turns out it's there just so that the movie can show clips of irrelevant future characters and overall foreshadow more franchise stuff, which, by the way, now won't happen at all anyway. What about the whole senator/courtroom plotline? What's the smart, complex payoff there? Actually, this subplot does get concluded pretty smartly. We get to see just how far Lex Luthor is willing to go to win and that there's no person he won't sacrifice on the way. Overall, I'd say it's a pretty crafty conclusion. Now I just wish there were more like it. If I had to condense my whole point about this steep opposition into 1 or 2 sentences, the best way to do it would be as follows. Batman v Superman starts off with a very deep and multi-layered poem about Bruce Wayne's inner feelings, and it ends in a massive green screen battle sequence with a mindless CGI monstrosity. One side is smart and complex, the other side is loud and dumb, and this huge gap in between, that's the problem.
There were perfect things. Diamond absolutes. And what falls is fallen.
Bruce!
In the dream, they took me to the light. A beautiful light.
But now that we have established and explained the core issue with Batman v Superman, let's see if we can pinpoint where that issue originates from. We know the problem, but what's the cause? If you want to find the root cause for the steep, smart and dumb division of Batman v Superman, look no further than the opening of the movie. To be exact, look right here. The reason is this. These two writers. And if it so happens you don't know anything about writers, let's just say that the reason why Batman v Superman has two opposite sides is because these two writers are very much opposites. The initial script of BVS was written by David Goyer, a writer who has been at the top of Hollywood for a long time now. He does have his name on some very smart movies like The Dark Knight with Christopher Nolan, but at the same time, he's also made quite a few projects like Blade and Call of Duty. As in, Goyer knows how to make a big, dumb, action-heavy Hollywood blockbuster. Then we have Chris Terrio, who came in to rewrite Goyer's Batman v Superman script around the same time that the movie was starting to film. And while Goyer has been a part of the Hollywood machine for a while, Terrio is more of a newcomer. Before winning an Oscar for Argo, he's mainly been working at the indie scene, where smart themes and characters are much more important than larger-than-life action set pieces. Before we get to what I think happened with the script of Batman v Superman, I first need you to understand what this credit page actually means. Right at the gate, the very first thing to note is this, the word "and". If this was an ampersand, that would mean that the writers were working as a team. But because it's the word "and", it means that the writers were working separately. AKA, Goyer wrote his own take on the movie and then Terrio stepped in to change it. And he must have done quite a bit of changing too, because his name comes first. The writer whose name comes first, that's the writer whose version of the script is closest to the final product. So even though Goyer wrote the initial version of BVS, Terrio's version for the most part is the version that we saw. So what exactly happened? Well, hard to say for sure, but if we follow the breadcrumbs, this is where they seem to lead. After Man of Steel, Christopher Nolan checks out and leaves this franchise with Goyer and Snyder. Goyer writes up a very action-heavy blockbuster that Snyder likes, because that's the kind of director Snyder is. But then, as the movie starts closing in on production, someone starts thinking that maybe this isn't the story that they want. So they bring in Ben Affleck's new best Argo friend, Chris Terrio, who tries to make the script a bit smarter. But because at this point the movie is already starting to film and a lot of the things are already locked down, there's only so much he can do. He can change up the scenes and he can change up the characters, but he can't change where they ultimately lead. As in, he can change the setup and the build-up, but he can't change the payoff. And that right there could be one of the reasons why we ended up where we are. That's why Lois Lane starts off as an intelligent real-life based reporter only to end up being a bumbling idiot. That's why Superman's motivations to fight Batman start off as layered and intricate only to end up being tossed away altogether. That's why Lex Luthor starts off as a very difficult and deeply sad character only to end up being a Joker-like lunatic who foreshadows the next movie. That right there is the reason why Batman v Superman starts off so smart and complex only to end up being the exact opposite.